You know, some people search all their lives for grace. Some people are married to grace, and some people live on Grace Avenue. I don't know if we're going to have any grace as part of this edition of Our Little Corner, but we're on Grace Avenue. The address is 8 Grace Avenue. We're going to talk with a guy that I've wanted to meet for a long time because he's interested in so many things that we are. His name is Jack Bilow. How are you, Jack?
How do you do, Gordy?
Thanks so much for inviting us into your home today. It's a pleasure when somebody just turns the light on in their kitchen and says, have a seat. And we find out a little bit about a guy that a lot of people already know about, but many of our viewers do not. I have found, in doing this programs with my friend Calvin Castine behind the camera over the last 3 years or so, that everybody would like to be a historian. Everybody would love to know their family history, their genealogy back a number of generations. But most people just don't know how to get started and don't have the time or the wherewithal. You've just decided to do it. If you wonder why the camera jerked up and down just a moment ago, it's because somebody came home. That was Andy, right?
Andy and Matt, yeah.
Andy and Matt. Oh, boy. Before we started our program today, it's amazing because when you live in the North Country as long as Calvin and I have, you can find some common ground with everybody you talk to. Either they know somebody you know, or their kid's related to somebody, or does something. And when we started today, you said, how's Chad? Yeah. My grandson, Chad. And because he was born on the same day as Andy?
Yeah, same day. Yeah.
Isn't that
CVPH. So.
And you knew that because you looked at the clipping?
We kept the clippings. We kept the clippings from the newspaper with all the kids that were born on the same day. So
they got their 24th birthday coming up. As we're recording this in January, I don't even know what the date is today. Can you remember?
Yeah, day after Elvis's birthday.
Oh, so January 9th. You know, I was just thinking as some of the radio stations were playing Elvis tunes, and this is really far away from this subject, that I've got all the teletype stories about Elvis when he died and the whole bit. I bet you they're probably worth $7 or $8 now, huh? Talk about history. It's hard to believe that was that long ago already. All right, let's start from the beginning, my dear friend. Now that you have allowed me in your kitchen, you're my dear friend. You were born in Chateauguay, and that's a fur piece from 8 Grace Avenue in Plattsburgh.
yes, it is. It's my family's been there since 1797 on my mother's side, and so I just moved back from Chateauguay. As a matter of fact, I lived there for 6 years and just moved back here again after being here for 20 years. So yeah, it's a piece away. It's some guy in town likened it to downtown Beirut because of some of the old buildings we got there in Chateauguay, but
it's great. And last year they celebrated, what, 150?
200.
200?
200, yeah.
Yeah, we went down there, and that was an awful lot of fun. Met some nice people. I love towns the size of Chateauguay.
Also, it's a great...
even if you're not from those towns, I love to just stop my car and walk around.
Well, people are great there. It's just a great town. There's just so many, and everybody knows everybody and everybody's grandfather, so it's a bit different than in Plattsburgh. You hardly know anybody across the street or, what they're doing, and when you go to Chateauguay, it's different. Just about everybody knows everybody, and everything they're doing.
Not that Plattsburgh is the biggest metropolis in the world, and it hasn't changed in population since I first moved here, probably back in 1961. Matter of fact, I don't know, we may have less people in the city limits now than we did back then, but it's hovered around 20,000 forever and ever, hasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. It seems that area, of course, when the base moved out, quite a few people moved to that. But, it's basically you can meet somebody new every day in Plattsburgh. In Chateauguay, if someone's robbing your hen coop, you know who it is. So,
if you see them licking their fingers, you know who that might be. Well, why did you get interested in history? I know you started with genealogy,
right.
Didn't you?
Right. My grandmother was she talked about her family quite a bit, and that's when I was young. I started doing research work on my family, and that's how I got started in genealogy. And my family had been in Chateauguay so long, it made research relatively easy. I mean, you can go in the county courthouses and work there, and that's where you get a large amount of things, plus Bible records and that type of thing. But
it still when you say fairly easy, some guy's going to run out and think he's going to have his family history by 4 o'clock this afternoon.
No.
It takes hundreds and hundreds of hours to do a complete genealogy.
I've got to say that if you start right with your own family. Hopefully you've got some older aunts or grandparents, and they can give you, you start from there, and they can give you lots of information. My grandmother died in 1991. She's 101 years old.
Really?
Yeah, and
See what you got in store for you.
well, I don't know. I kind of live a rougher life than she did, but anyways, she belonged to the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and then they changed that to the Earlville's Ladies Guild. So they were.
Well, I know about the WCTU. That was a part of the fabric of my youth. Okay.
So she didn't go for any of that type of stuff, but she thought anybody that moved twice in their lifetime was a vagrant. She lived in the same farm for her whole life, except when she was first married for a couple of years. But she still stayed in Earlville, which is a hamlet in Chateaugay, small hamlet. So.
It's how many times, Calvin, have we urged people to talk to their grandparents and their great-grandparents and their great-great-grandparents, get them on tape, or at least write down the stories they have to tell, because when they're gone, people are scrounging. They don't even know who their grandparents, what their grandparents' names were, many people.
How many times have you seen, you go to an auction and they're selling the family Bible, and Grandpa in a big frame picture is going too, and they're
That breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I want to cry when I see that.
That just happens all the time. You got people that don't care, and I guess it takes all types. Maybe that's why those pictures are so valuable, because there's not a lot kept. But genealogy right now is the biggest hobby in the United States.
I know there are lots of ways to get ripped off when you want to get started. So here's a guy who's an expert on the subject. You can go on the internet and pay an awful lot of money for programs and get into an awful lot of websites that may not tell you very much before they've cleaned your wallet out.
Well, I cut my teeth on Searching for Your Ancestors by Gilbert Doan, and he was a noted researcher and genealogist. And I read the book, and then I started doing work, and then I read the book again after I got into it, and it really helped out a lot. But you want to get as many specifics as you can. I mean, if you run an article and you're doing genealogy, you don't want to put in, I'm looking for all the Johnson family or all the Smith family, because no one's going to write you a letter. You have to be specific, and as specific as you can be, and give a name and around the same dates when you're doing that type of work. But there's a lot of interesting things in genealogy. My ancestors on my father's side came to Champlain. They were in the Revolutionary War. They were French Canadians, and they fought in a brigade known as Moses Hagen's brigade, or they called them Congress's Own, and they fought for the duration of the war. They were all over New York State, and they were at Yorktown, and a whole bunch of them settled in the town of Champlain, and my family stayed there till 1853 on Kings Bay. So there's quite a bit of history with that part of it.
It's just so fascinating. Most people you talk to, as I said before, are interested in hearing people like you and me talk about it, and they don't know how to get started. And I hope that some of our viewers will get a pencil and paper and take notes today and find out the name of that book and get started in a small way. And boy, you get to meet a lot of people when you're doing genealogy, don't you?
Well, actually, you get a chance to meet some of your relatives you normally wouldn't talk to. You don't have anything in common with maybe an old aunt that's 80 or 90 years old, but when you sit down, you can have a lot of fun if that's your type of interest. And she can also, pictures are very important, because no one ever puts the names on the back of pictures. And if you don't, you might just well throw them out. I mean, you don't know who they are, and it's too bad. I've had collections of pictures before where I don't have any names on the back of them. And it's I don't like it, but what are you going to do?
You know what I do when that happens to me? I'll either mention them in the newspaper or on this program and hope that people will respond, because, as you said, you go to a flea market, there's a table full of personal photographs, and you wonder who died and who didn't care.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens. It's a generation that doesn't care. Clean the house out. We got to move renters in or remodel this house, and take load after load of all that precious stuff to the dump.
Yeah.
Or sell it in an auction, or sell it at a sale, and it's left to people like you and me to find out who those folks were, and maybe give the pictures back to the people that once owned them, or save them for our own collections.
I've had several pictures I saved and had some of them put in the Feinberg Library. They will take certain pictures
Oh, they
for the
absolutely
collection,
will.
and who was it? Jeff Myers is the one that did the book on Plattsburgh with the
Yes, he
pillars.
did.
He put a couple of pictures. He had a picture of my grandparents in there that he got from the Feinberg Library, and he also had a picture of my wife's great grandfather. and his name was Joseph Gibson. He was in the Civil War, and I'm kind of glad I put them in because it's in his book and it's well distributed now. So he did a fine job in that book. Yeah, he did a fine job.
And Dr. Richard Frost is doing a book on the city of Plattsburgh and collecting photographs now as we're recording this in early January of 2001. And he's looking for Plattsburgh photographs. And I don't know if you ever met our friend Ron Venn over at Bailey Avenue, but he's got, how many has he got? About 1,000 photographs. And he likes to do the before and after pictures. He takes the one old picture and puts it on a page, finds out where it was taken, and stands in exactly that spot today, maybe 140 years later, and takes a picture. No matter what's there, he tries to take a picture of that same spot.
Well, our small town, we had a small paper called Chateauguay Record, and they used to put pictures from the past in there, and they were tremendous. They were great. I liked it. They do it in the Mullen Telegram now, and I also enjoy that a great deal. Just seeing the old pictures in the paper. I think it'd be great in the Plattsburgh Press, but I don't want to tell them how to run their business. So
they do have that look back column, which is very interesting, of 25, 50, 75, and 100 years ago, that I find fascinating because every year I realize how a big chunk of that has been my life here in Plattsburgh since since the middle 50s.
Well, the Cornerstone Bookstore down here they published a book on Plattsburgh with photos, and you're probably aware of that. And that's a fine production, and I like that. I enjoy that book pretty good. So
I was like a kid in a candy shop when I first got that. Of course, we talk about Nancy, and we stop in and embarrass her every once in a while as we turn the camera on inside her store. But it's nice to know people who are interested in preserving North Country history, isn't it?
Oh yeah, there's and there are a lot of people doing it. It's just. For a long time, I was the youngest guy doing it, and now I'm not the youngest guy anymore, but I used to be at least 20, 30 years younger than most of the people that were doing the research work. At one time doing genealogy and research work, I think you had to be over 50 or something there, and most of them were. I was 20-some years old, so I was a little bit different than most people, but I think it was my grandmother's influence. She pretty much would talk about her, her ancestors, and you have interesting things. She had an uncle that drowned to death in Westford Pond over in Milton, Vermont, and she told me the story about it many times. And I was looking for a picture of her mother, so I went over and to the cemetery, and there was this Rogers family buried there, and she said, well, Artie Rogers had the picture. So I found this Artie Rogers' grandson, and he started talking. He says, my grandfather was out by Westford Pond years ago, and this guy drowned out there. He couldn't save him because he'd been in the Civil War and he lost one arm. It was exactly the same story she told me, and we were probably the only two people in the world that knew that story at the time. So that's amazing.
Amazing. Yeah. The contacts you can make, some have got to be pure coincidence, but at other times you look up there and you say, I think somebody's running this show. When you walk in or walk into somebody in a store and they've got something to add to your story.
Well, this fellow that we're talking about drowned in 1878. So, this is just a story that was passed down through both families, but each family lost track after probably about 1900 of each other. So, he's still over there, I think, his family. But it was quite interesting. It'll give you a little chill there.
What a tribute! This will be a tribute to grandmothers everywhere, because grandmothers are very often the ones who nurture the little grandchildren, who instill in them some of the old ways, which were still some of the best ways. And preserving family history is one of the best things you can do. And I find it tragic when nobody has preserved any family history for 4 or 5 generations, and then you get a young person or even somebody our age who all of a sudden realizes they want to have a legacy for their kids, and they can't find out squat.
Well, once these people pass away, you can't ever retrieve that information. It's just it's tremendously. They're no longer there to describe family members or photographs or things like that, and they have it in their mind. And sometimes I wish they'd take retired people, retired homes, just sit down and do their own genealogy and file it somewhere either in the Feinberg Library or with the county historian here. And,
every once in a while, somebody will write a grant, and a bunch of college students will get a video recorder and go to nursing homes and interview 15 or 20 or 100 people. And those things are preserved, and we'll get to watch somebody we never saw before and listen to their family stories, and they're great. But that's why I've always done it. When I was in the radio business, as I've said many times on this program, when somebody reached 100, that milestone. Your grandmother died at 101. Somebody reached 100, I would go with a tape recorder and just let them talk until they got tired of talking. And I've got a stack of those tapes, and I listen to them now. Old Walter Sample on Bailey Avenue was 104 when I interviewed him, and he was sound of mind and body at that time. He didn't live much longer, but he was an amazing guy.
We had some guy on Malone a while ago, and I don't know if you remember Ray Russell. He used to write for the Telegram, and he was 107 years old. He's on TV, and I said, Jesus, Ray, does this guy look like he's about 60 or 70 years old? He said, yeah, well, he's still got his license. He's still driving around. 107 years old. He was on TV for, they were doing an article on Dutch Schultz, and he was one of the last remaining people that had been around when the trial went on. So they interviewed him, and he was on television. But 107 years old. That's unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, the point we're trying to make, and we're going to ramble a lot because that's what people interested in history do. They get off on tangents, and we love to do that. But we're going to talk about a variety of topics before we're finished today. Genealogy is one. And before we leave the topic of genealogy, I want to say that you can get on the internet and still, at least it's a valuable resource if you know how to use it, how to look for it. Now, when you started, the computers weren't around, right?
I still don't have a computer.
You still don't? You've done all this legwork on your own?
Yeah.
Oh,
I still don't have a
hats
computer.
off to you.
Well, they asked me when I was at the National Archives a while ago, well, have you got a computer at home? I said, look, we've only got one red light in town. You know, what do you expect?
And it's not on that compact computer.
No, it's not. So there are so many things that you have to start at home first. That's the only thing I'll tell anybody who's doing genealogy. Start at home, work at it, collect your pictures, get them labeled. Sometimes they don't want to let go of their things. Get someone to copy them and keep a copy yourself. You know, you can't always pick these up. And I copied many. As a matter of fact, Ralph Stone from Champlain used to do all my photography work for me and copying the pictures over years ago. And I've collected, I think I've got all of my grandparents, great-grandparents, and I think most of my great-great-grandparents got photos of them I've kept. So.
Oh, that's neat. And churches, old Bibles, cemeteries.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. You want to work with your Bibles. Census records are great, and that can really help you a lot. And you can also build around it. Sometimes an older person, their memory is not as good as sharp, but if you have a census record, you can mention some names to them, and it'll bring it's like an interview. It'll bring things to them, and they'll discuss these certain people that they wouldn't have before. So it's an interesting thing.
I found it's helpful to become friendly with court clerks and county clerks' offices.
Right. You want to be good to those people, and like I said, you don't want to walk in and say, "I'm looking for Joe Johnson," and he died about 50 years ago. You want to go right out to the cemetery and get the death date, and if you're going to talk with these people, try to get as much information you can because they have so many people writing letters now, and it takes so much time. You want to be precise and short, and you'll get more of a chance to have your letter answered.
So you've been working on your own genealogy for how long?
Well, probably since 1971. Right? I've done it. I haven't done since the kids have been growing up and playing sports. I haven't done as much in the last few years, but I've been working on it that long, and it has been a lot of fun. And my family has been in these two counties, which makes it easier, Franklin and Clinton, since the beginning of the 1800s, 1700s. Before that, on the French side, they came from Chambly, Quebec. And my family was bilingual for 200 years in the United States till my generation, which is unusual. It's easier in Quebec, but in my male line, they all married a French-Canadian girl until my father, and that was the end of our... I have a sister that's a French teacher, however, so...
You never learned the language?
No, I know quite a bit of it through doing research in books and stuff, but I'm not fluent in it, and I do understand some things. But I wish I was. I wish I was able to speak French.
Who's going to take the torch when you're no longer around another 50 or 60 years?
No, it won't be that long. But anyway, there's always somebody to pick up the torch. I hope there's a lot of people that are doing historical work. I mean, Alan Everest is not with us any longer, but there was a great guy that did a great amount of work, and he was one of the coolest guys that I knew. I mean, I just liked him, and he helped me a lot.
Did he really?
Oh yeah, he did. I went over to his house quite a bit there, and of course it's been quite a few years. I think he has a daughter still living in Plattsburgh here, but he's a great guy.
And people who are interested in history, and especially North Country history, would do well to get the Alan Everest books. And actually, there are quite a few books written about the history of the North Country, and every now and again, I'll be in somebody's camp out in the woods or somewhere, and they'll show me a book that was written in 1890 or 1910 about the history of that area. Sometimes just focused on one family or two families or a very small area, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 miles. But those books are available in people's homes and libraries.
Well, one of the first books I ran across was David Martin. He's from Shazy, and he was the guy that actually, I couldn't compare to him as being a genealogist. The guy's just tremendously talented, and he showed me a lot. He's done work all over the United States, and he enjoys it. I don't know if you know him or not, but he wrote a book with Nell Sullivan, The History of Shazy, a very good book, and that's where I got my start. This is the guy that started me off. I asked anybody if they knew anything about genealogy, and at that time, back in the early 70s, there weren't a lot of people doing it, and he's the guy that gave me the boost there and started telling me what to do and how to do it, and I listened pretty good. So he's excellent.
I'll bet you if Jack Bilow ever got a computer, it would never shut off. You would have people beating on your door for information.
Well, I've never done information on other people's families per se as far as genealogy goes, because I don't think I can put enough time into it and do it correctly. I do my own because it's a love type of thing. But if anybody wants general information on how to find things out, I'm always glad to help them if I can. A telephone call is good. So.
Yeah, before we go on now, you work as a CO now?
All right, I've been up there for 20 years at Denimore.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh boy, a chosen profession of how many people in the North Country for how long? We sat at Terry Gilroy's table up there in Dannemora before he headed for the Southland, before the heavy snows came, while the leaves were still beautiful on the trees, and got a little history of that facility. That's quite a bit of history up there.
Right, there is. I've seen they had a major riot in 1929 up there, and I've got the article out of the newspaper, and they had quite a time. It's not an easy place to live, or it's not an easy place to work, but we do the best we can, and it's not as adversarial as people think it is. I mean, we work with those people up there sometimes for years, and we try to do the best we can, and that's all we can do.
Everybody got to be somewhere, right? Yeah. All right, you've written a couple of books that you're pretty proud of. Which was the first one?
Well, I wrote a couple genealogies. I did one on my line, and then I did one on my wife's line on the Drowns and Sunderlands, and then this was my first venture into doing anything in hardcover. It's on Chateauguay in the War of 1812.
Oh, you did? You wrote the entire genealogy for each side?
No, you can't do that. It's impossible.
Yeah.
You just can't, and it goes up. It doubles every generation until you get to a certain point, and there's not that many people in the world, so it starts coming back in. So you're related to yourself several times. This is. I have one guy that I descend from New England from the 1600s about 3 or 4 times, but that's
amazing. Of course,
right. You're going to have that.
How long are they? How long are each one of those?
Long? You mean?
How many pages?
Well, it's not a matter of pages. You just I couldn't tell you that because I have so many files. I keep files.
You don't have them all typed up in one?
No, I haven't. Just the one I did on the Bilow side of the family, and then the one on the Drowns and Sunderlands. That's typed up, and it's there's photos and things like that in there, and that's you have to. Sometimes, like on some branches of the family, it's very small. There might be 1 or 2 people just keeping the family alive through generations. And then other times you might have, like a lot of the French Canadians and had 10 or 12 kids. My grandmother had 12 children, so they had big families. There's quite a bit of information you can find in that.
Have you copied any of this for your family, other fellow family members or other?
Well, I had 300 books produced, and I passed them around. With the main object is to keep the pictures from so that people would know who the pictures are.
How many pages in the book?
Well, that book was, I think, somewhere around 60 or 70 pages. It was offset printing, and it was just typed regularly. It was not hardcover or anything. It was a soft cover, small book.
Now, for the people who would like to do something like that or have the information, would like to get it published, how do you do that? Did you do it on your own?
Well, you type everything up yourself, and then you. I went here in the offset printing. There's some companies around that do offset printing here, and they can do it for you. And there's companies in Malone, they do it on a smaller basis. And then if you want to go hardcover, I think there are a few in the area. I've gotten mine done in Canada.
Oh, you have?
Yeah,
okay.
Because it's only 40 miles away.
So you made 300 copies. And something you distributed on your own or sold to your family members?
Just sold to my family members, right? So that would be the only interest anyway. So we had a reunion in probably 1978 or 79. There was about 250 people there, and they were just descendants of my great-great-grandfather. But that was only like a quarter of them. So there's a lot.
Came from all over the country?
All over the country, yeah. Quite a few states, Florida, Rhode Island.
It's like the Rouse reunion that our friend Peg Barkham put together some years back. It turned, and how, we talk about people doing things without computers. I don't know how she did it. She showed us hundreds of letters she had written and got in response, and people had a ball.
Well, Jacques Rouse served with my ancestor in the Revolutionary War. And
should have known there was a
I know these names probably as well as I know, a lot of people, but because I've researched so much with them. But they had the movie just come out, The Patriot, and people were complaining about 12 and 14-year-old boys firing guns. My ancestor was 10 years old when he enlisted in the Continental Army in 1780, and he enlisted with his father. His father was a lieutenant, and the name was Amable Bilow, which is my name, but it's now spelled Bilow. There's still a few Boileaus that are buried in the cemetery in Coopersville, right across from the church up there. So that's my great-great-great-uncle, I guess.
There's a lot of very young kids that have fought in wars. You don't have to go too far back to find how many young Vietnamese boys and women fought.
It's the same in Mexico right now. These young kids, 10 and 12 years old, are fighting. And so it wasn't unusual at that time in the United States at all. He drew a pension from the United States government, and he died in 1853. He probably got a chance to see the British come marching back into town because the road was right on the lake shore. So I'm sure he got a view of that, and it probably didn't tickle him at all. So he was right in view of the White House also, which used to be there on Kings Bay. Do you know where that is? It was sort of a fortress. And I had one ancestor that was captured during the War of 1812. His name was Benjamin Marvin. He was from Marlborough, Vermont, and he was brought to the White House and jailed there for 2 or 3 days. The British trumped up some charges, and they were going to try to make him a British citizen again, but he fought in the French and Indian War, and he also was a captain in the Revolutionary War, and his discharge papers signed by John Hancock. So it was he got around a little bit. He's buried in Alberg Cemetery, just as you drive in to the left there, him and his wife.
Have you been able to find any really old documents connected with your family, like birth certificates, marriage certificates, and things from way back when?
Well, sometimes you try to get into collections like the New York State collection and other collections in libraries, and hopefully you can run into something. You have to associate your people with other people. Like Benjamin Moores was associated with the Canadian refugees, and so there's a collection there, quite a bit of his stuff, and there was information in there on my ancestors. And then they also had what was known as the Burnt Hills collection. It's on the Bailey family, and I found a 1785 census in this record, and it had my ancestors in it. And what was unusual about the census was it was done for provisions and food for the refugees that were settled along Lake Champlain here, and when the government first dropped them there. And what was unusual is the head of the household, his wife, and all the children, they had the names and the ages, whereas the early census records from 1790 to 1840 only have the heads of households. So it was an unusual thing, and we had it published in the local genealogical society here in town. Put it in there. That's a good genealogical society to belong to. They have a book that comes out I think twice a year or something like that. So they're headquartered in Keysville.
Really? There are a lot of organizations, and I'm sure Jack would answer the telephone if you want to call him up and ask him how you can get started on your own family's genealogy. It pleases me to see young people who are interested. You said you were one of the youngest when it began, but now I see in more and more young people, probably because of the internet, because there's so much advertising on the internet for special programs for genealogy.
One thing about genealogy is it's cheap. You can go to a library and study all day, and if you enjoy it, it's a lot of fun, and it's not. You can spend a lot of money, but if you want to, you can do the research yourself. And
mostly, it's time.
Oh, it's time. Yeah, it certainly takes a lot.
A few long-distance telephone calls here and there.
Here and there, yeah. Sometimes you can't wait for an answer, and you'll call somebody up. And I just got back from the National Archives. I spent 2 weeks down there.
Did you
research
really?
work? Yeah. And the thing that I'm working on now is trying to get the names of the soldiers who died in Plattsburgh and Burlington and Chateauguay and French Mills, which is Fort Covington now, and Malone. And I put in quite a few hours of work so far, and I'm coming up with good results. And hopefully, if we can get some help from our politicians here, we can. I'd like to have a wall put up, and that similar to the Vietnam Wall, and have the names of these soldiers put on it, because they did die here, and they'd get little credit when it comes, for the yearly celebrations or for any of the books. One thing that was really good in research work was each captain had a company, and they had a company book. And the National Archives only has half, but as you can see here, they have a death register, and there's some in there that are from Plattsburgh. I don't know how well the tape can come in, but here's Ziba Curtis. He was killed in the retreat from Champlain to here on September 6, 1814, and he was killed in Beacontown, and he was killed in action here and during the Battle of Plattsburgh. And then we have many of them that died natural deaths in the hospital here. The hospital was the most dangerous place to be during the
Was it really?
Well, the most dangerous place to be was a prisoner of war. I recently, when I was at the National Archives, I found the list of prisoners who died who were on the Growler and the Eagle when they were first captured. So we get the story, but we don't get the end of the story. These guys were 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. Most of them were from Marblehead, Massachusetts. I don't know if they were sailors, and there was at least 20 or 30 from both brigs that died in prisoner of war camps, and so it was very dangerous. And there was an article in the 1892 Plattsburgh paper about soldiers being buried. They found 25 of them in a trench on the old base, and they were all buried face down. And they were wondering in the newspaper why they buried them face down. And I can only think of two reasons. One would be they were disease-ridden, they were sick, and when the stretcher bearers brought them out, they just dumped them over. And the other reason might have been they just didn't want to throw dirt in their face because there was no coffins. These people were. We probably have. There's probably 500-600 soldiers that are buried on the old base out there, and nobody knows where they're buried. They're buried all over here, and there's some buried on Crab Island, some buried on Cumberland Head. So it's. Hopefully I can get some help and we can get something done here. I'd like to see something like that with at least their names. I mean, that would be the least amount of respect.
The genesis of what might be a tremendous idea, something I've never heard broached before.
Well,
do you have any support?
No, I haven't started yet. I wanted to be able to get the names, and then just to show people the magnitude and the number of people that died here. I mean, people treat the War of 1812, I think, something like the Vietnam War. A lot of times it was just a little pesky war, but I can tell you an awful lot of people died in it. I have the hospital book from Sackett's Harbor, and 400 men died in their hospital alone during the course of a couple of years. And Plattsburgh was it was a major hospital area here. Probably out on the base there was a whole area for soldiers. They had hospitals out here, and it became a major area for hospitals. And Burlington was another major area for hospitals to take these people, but they were cold, they were ill-fed, and I was talking to Calvin earlier today and said, I can't understand why they all didn't desert. It was just terrible. The conditions were terrible. They had one soldier that was beaten to death by one of his officers on the way from Chateauguay to Plattsburgh. Just kicked him to death, and they had a trial, and no one was found guilty of anything. So,
Some of those old court records and court-martial records are very fascinating.
Well, everyone court-martialed everyone, and if they were jealous of them, this is one of the things that are not brought out in books. A lot of these fellows that were heroes here, some of them were a little bit discredited because this was a pretty famous battle, and because of the fact that it was on both lake and land, there was a guy named White Youngs. He was a captain, and there was another fellow named George McGlasson. And these are names that are not brought up in our history books. In the Battle of Plattsburgh, mostly they deal with the top dogs, like Macomb and McDonough and things like that. There's not a lot of time put in on the regular soldier that gave his life here in town. So.
Well, I don't need to ask you how you got interested in the Battle of Plattsburgh and the War of 1812 because it's so much a part of this North Country.
Oh, it's probably one of the biggest. Oh, it's one of the biggest things we've had here. But I don't want to sound like somebody from Sixth Sense, but when I was growing up, you had you knew the soldiers were buried in Chateauguay, and every once in a while somebody would find a button. You just didn't know where. I mean, you had an idea. You had an idea where the old school was, and the older people would say, "Oh yeah, during the War of 1812, a lot of soldiers died here," and there was a lot of history here. And until I started digging into it, there was relatively little information on Chateauguay or Franklin County in the War of 1812. And what I discovered after I finished the book is that the reason they went to Chateauguay, that it was an ideal situation. As you drive into Chateauguay, you'll notice you'll come across the Boardman Brook. If you go north into Canada, there's the Marble River, and if you're going out towards Malone, there's the Chateauguay River. So it's a perfect place to protect yourself, and that's why the Army was parked there. And from three sides, nobody can get them. We did have one skirmish where Lieutenant William Nash was shot to death, and it's probably on the LeCount Road, which is a little road to the right. See, the bridge didn't go straight across when it first started. Went around the backside of the cemetery because they used to go up and down the sides of hills. They didn't have much for bridges at that time. So those type of things, like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm in Sixth Sense, but you always knew they were there for some reason. You were thinking they're buried here somewhere.
How can you not know?
Well, I don't know.
Never mind Sixth Sense. How can you not know? These people, if you believe in any kind of religion, these people all had souls. They mostly died violent deaths. How can something not be there?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to sound.
It certainly was for you.
Well, you don't want to sound like a nut or anything, but you always had that feeling that these.
He's different from me. I don't even mind because I'm very fascinated by what survives after we're dead and gone, and there are a lot of reasons for us going back and trying to discover these things, not the least of which is the fact that some of that energy has got to be right there.
I would say that whenever you have areas like the old base in Plattsburgh, and I'm sure there's a lot of areas out there, you have 800 or 900 men that are buried out there. Is there some sort of energy force with these fellows? But there's no names. They're not remembered in any way. A lot of them never had children. They were young boys, 17, 16 years old. Some of them were killed and some of them died, and their families never saw them again. Of course, at that time, we didn't have railroads, so you were buried right here. Very few people were taken home unless it was in the local area. And we did have some local area people who were in the War of 1812 and were in the U.S. Army, because the first 6 regiments were the old regiments. After that, they went up to 45 regiments, and they recruited all over the United States. So there were a lot of people, and there was thousands of people involved in the militia too, and all over New York State. And of course, the Vermont people came over here during the Battle of Plattsburgh, and the governor was mad because they weren't supposed to leave the state. And then Vermont then petitioned the federal government for funds because they had to pay for some of the stuff coming over here for the Battle of Plattsburgh. But for most of those militia guys coming over here, I think a lot of people wonder why the Army retreated. And they had all these veterans that came over from the Napoleonic Wars and fought down here, when in fact 60 to 70% of the soldiers were probably French Canadians that were recruited over here. But they wonder why the Army turned around and went back to Canada. Well, I think probably it was a great effect on them to see probably hundreds of rafts and boats coming across the lake with soldiers, and they were coming in like swarms. They were coming up from Albany. They were coming in from Chateauguay. The militia was coming in from Vermont by the thousands, and these guys started seeing this, and I think that was one of the major reasons. They were coming. There was descriptions of the lakes almost covered with these guys coming across anything they could grab from Burlington to come over to fight in the Battle of Plattsburgh. So
don't you wish they had video cameras back in those days?
Oh, that would have been nice.
Oh, man.
That would have been nice. But,
so your focus in this book, of course, is Chateauguay and the War of 1812. And how long did it take you to amass that information?
I worked on that for 3 years. I traveled around the country. I went to Washington, D.C. I went up to the archives in Quebec, and some of the best records, of course, were diaries that I used. I used Izzard's diary, and also a fellow by the name of Richard Bishop. And Bishop was killed on September 6th, and I don't know how his diary's down in Albany. I don't know how his diary ever survived, but he was shot on the retrograde movement from Champlain to Plattsburgh, so he died during the battle. One of the guys that wrote the diary in here. So I don't have any idea where he's buried or anything. He may be buried in Chazy or Champlain.
Well, this is a fairly considerable book. What year did you finish it?
I finished it in 1985, so it's been around for a while.
I don't know. Do we want to show the picture on the back? I think we ought to see this black beard here.
It was a little while ago.
Was that 85, that picture?
Yeah, it was about 85, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I haven't read the book, but I promise that I will. What kind of stuff in it? Do you have a lot of paintings and?
Well, we have quite a few things in there, and here's some of the articles that we have. Here's a map that I got from the National Archives, and in it, as he zeroes,
I'll hold it up and you describe it.
As he zeroes in on it, you can see I put before I put it in the book, I typed in all the names over the top so people could read them. But it's a pretty accurate thing. It even have people's houses listed on here, and it was done by a fellow by the name of Totten, and he was an engineer. He was also here at the Battle of Plattsburgh, and there were 3 or 4 engineers here that did real well. And so he has a description which they needed information. This is called the Sketch of the St. Lawrence from Montreal up to Cornwall. As you can see, it's got the Plattsburgh, and it's got the Plattsburgh Cantonment down here, and it has Chazy listed. I've just typed in everything over the top, and here's Odelltown, and actually the battle at Lacole, they had a battle at Lacole, and it was they probably lost as many, if not more, men than they did in the Battle of Plattsburgh. So it was that was quite an interesting affair, and I'm sure there's...
Yeah, we've been up the Odelltown Road right there, Calvin.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then they have places here. They have Cocknowaga. There were a number of Indians involved in this venture here. Over in Chateauguay, I think there's some reports of the Indians yelling during the night, and it scared the hell out of the soldiers because they had a fear of the Indians, coming in, and of course I'm sure the Indians had a fear of them. So it was a mutual thing. But it's got Malone, it's got Chateauguay Four Corners on here, and as a matter of fact, they call Chateauguay Four Corners before it was Chateauguay. And in a lot of the reports, in the military reports, you'll see it's called Four Corners. That's just all. And they called it, the first name was Sevenstown. So we've been lucky ever since.
Sevenstown. Right. Why? Why
well,
Sevenstown?
It was on the 7th tract or something. It had something to do with land tract, that type of thing.
That's Fort Hickory.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Fort Hickory's on there too. Fort Hickory. It wasn't really a fort. It was a Batis. They used to drop trees around and put tents up and stuff. And it was, my ancestor's name was Peleg Douglas, and it was at his house that this happened. That's why.
What was the first name?
Peleg Douglas. You don't see that name anymore.
No, I wouldn't think so.
But I had 2 ancestors actually, and one was Peleg Douglas, and the other one was Jacob Smith. And right here, if this map zeroes in, this is Chateauguay in 1813. Again, and it's a sort of a smaller version, but Fort Hickory was right here, and Peleg Douglas's house, it was dropped around there. I have a spy letter that describes it perfectly, so it was great, and it's got even the Douglas's name on here. Here's Jacob Smith, who was a veteran of the Revolutionary War, and they had an encampment at his house, sort of a picket, a guard, so they could. There was probably about 300 soldiers stationed here at Fort Hickory, and we have an interesting fellow here, Samuel Hollenbeck. Now, Samuel Hollenbeck, there's a monument up to him in Chateauguay. They have one of the New York State signs, and he was credited by single-handedly fighting off the British from Fort Hickory, and it was all a fable made up by Samuel Hollenbeck, but he promoted himself. He was quite.
I love it.
He was quite interested in the fact that he enlisted in the militia, and he was a sergeant of the guard at Chateauguay, but also he had a house close to the Canadian border. So he was giving information to the Canadians while in his capacity as a soldier and moving back and forth. And I have some of those letters saying Agent Hollenbeck, so forth. And so he was getting paid by us and getting paid by them and doing a nice business during the War of 1812. So
we thought we invented that in the last century. No, that's been going on since the beginning of time.
Fort Hickory was supposedly, anything named Fort Hickory was named after Andrew Jackson, but it wasn't. It was named after Hampton because he was as hard as Hickory on the men. So that's why they named it Fort Hickory. And they had a real problem when they invaded into Quebec. The invasion route there's still a road there because they made a road along the Chateauguay River right into Canada. And then they went right up through the Chateauguay River, and that's where they encountered about 1,200 soldiers. And here is a drawing. It's in French, so many people probably won't be able to read it, but this is the battle plan of the Chateauguay River. And they had a big abatis around here. And during the summer, they have a museum up there. It's just before you get to Ormstown. And they have a lot of things up there, soldiers' uniforms, and they also have descriptive things. So I'd recommend if anybody wants to look up there. Their 1,200 men repelled our 4,200 men. So we didn't do very well. In the flintlocks, it was raining, and a lot of the flintlocks didn't work, and so they had trouble. And then we had one guy that was so interested in getting out of there that he was an officer. He pushed one of the soldiers out of the boats and jumped in it and took off down the river trying to get back to Chateauguay. So they court-martialed him, and of course the whole thing was a disaster. It was a disaster, and it was too late in the year. It was cold again. The men were cold, and there was little consideration to the men at that time. And it was a big fiasco. And Wilkinson was involved with this, and Wade Hampton was from South Carolina, and he was a rich man. They had plantations down there, and he still has descendants down there. And as a matter of fact, if you watch Gone with the Wind, there's a letter on one of the tables that Scarlett reads, and it says Wade Hampton III. Well, this is Wade Hampton's grandson, and he was quite a staunch member of the Revolutionary War, or the Civil War. He was a great fighter in the Civil War for the South, of course. But Wade Hampton slipped down on a boat and went down Lake Champlain and got out in the middle of the night while the getting was good. And I think he resigned before they had a chance to court-martial him. So he was quite a character. But I think that our top character, he would be like a Nathan Bedford Forrest, was Benjamin Forsyth. Now he's buried up in Champlain. You probably know where the monument is. It's near the cemetery, the old cemetery up there. This guy was brave, reckless. He was probably the most flamboyant person in the whole War of 1812. He was always, the Canadians wanted to get him. They had a price on his head. They were after him. He would go in and raid and fight, and he was a fighter. There was none of this sitting back waiting. This guy did it. And we had our, you know how we have a lot of people that complain to the Press Republican, there's always letters to the editor? Well, we didn't have that back then, but we had this fellow in Plattsburgh by the name of Caleb Nichols. And Caleb Nichols writes to the Secretary of War several times. And in some of the things, Caleb Nichols trying to tell the Secretary of War how to fight the war, how to beat the British. And he's writing letters in all of them. But one of my favorite lines, he goes, and you know that Benjamin Forsyth, you know he was too brave for his own good anyways, and you know why he got shot? He always wore that jacket that everybody could recognize, and he was killed up here. But they made a point to get him, and he would probably have been something like Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was just a great cavalryman, and he didn't care. He went after him. And they wanted to get him. So we have some personalities here that I think I got a picture over here of. Let me see. Here's a picture of Wade Hampton, right here, and he was at the Battle of Chateauguay, and did not do very well, and neither did Wilkinson. And if you the research work that I have done lately with Fort Covington. Fort Covington, they called it French Mills at the time. They should have called it French Kills, because there were so many soldiers that died there. I have probably 200 soldiers that right now, and there are more, that died in French Mills in the hospital in the winter. And that was after the battle.
Pretty good-sized cantonment there, too.
Large one. They had 3 or 4 of them. Each brigade had one, and I just happen to have a map from the National Archives of Fort Covington right here. And if you zero in, they've drawn in the woods here. They've drawn the road from Chateauguay, which still comes in basically the same way it did. And then you have the light artillery in French Mill Village. You have the little houses. They put little houses, and here's where the brigades were, and here's the buildings that were up at that time. And we had a book on a diary from a McIntyre. I can't remember his first name. And when they left, they lit all these hospitals on fire. They burned them to the ground. And the McIntyre wonders in his diary, he says, why do men always delight at burning buildings? Well, I can say this: if I had to stay there a winter with all the death, I wouldn't have any problem burning the building down at all, because they had terrible care, terrible food. Just beyond me how these guys could just even operate. One of the regiments with the largest desertion rate was the 29th, and it was a New York regiment. And the Southern boys were pretty tough. They stayed, and a lot of them died. But the local regiments around the area, they, of course, could get back home a lot easier. But the 29th, although they had one of the largest desertion rates and one of the largest sick rates, during the Battle of Plattsburgh, they had one of the largest death rates. They were involved in it heavily. The guys that were left made up for it in the Battle of Plattsburgh. So,
we're learning about not just more battles all the time, because I'm sure many of our viewers didn't know that Chateauguay was in any way involved in the Battle of Plattsburgh and the War of 1812 until today, just because they haven't paid attention. But I'm learning from old documents and personal histories that people wrote in the 1800s and even into the early 1900s that there were skirmishes that weren't even in the history books, that we're just now learning about.
There were several soldiers stationed up in Champlain and Chazy. They had skirmishes up there all the time. I mean, people are coming back and forth across the border. And one of the other thing too is these Southern gentlemen are quite different than we are. They still believed in duels. So if you wanted to have a duel, it was not legal in the North. So where did they go? They went across Canada, and there's several in the newspapers. They shot each other up there. They had duels. Our American officers from the South went up there. If they had a duel, somebody insulted somebody, and they'd have the duels in Canada. They just go over the border so that no one would arrest them, of course. So
We go over the border for a lot of different reasons these days. Unbelievable. All right, what's this one?
this is Daniel Bissell, and he was stationed at Chateauguay for during the winter, and it's just one of those pictures I added in. He didn't do anything quite famous, but he just happened to be the commandant at Chateauguay during that winter of 1813, 1814. So
Now, you finished this a long time ago. Let's pause for a moment, and we'll continue in just a moment. Yeah, we paused just for a moment so Calvin could get us back on track. He always has to wind up the key a little bit and get us in the right direction. What I was going to point out just before we shut the camera off for a moment is this book was written, you finished it, when did you say, 1980?
1985.
1985. How much new, juicy stuff about this topic have you uncovered since that time?
Well, there's not a lot new. Like I said, with the work I've been doing here on the individuals that died, that gives me more information. But I just recently got in an 1814 newspaper, a weekly register, and it had Colonel Purdy's account of the Battle of Chateauguay, and he was pretty ashamed of it, and he was trying to cover for himself. But the battle, they call it sometimes the Battle of Sears, because I guess it was around the Sears farm, or the Battle of the Chateauguay River, and it was pretty humiliating for us. We had 40 to 60 men that were captured and taken to prisoner of war camps. In Halifax is where they used to take them. And then we had, there were a number that were shot there during the battle, and we retreated, but it was embarrassing. It was a fiasco, and that's why we were discussing about Wade Hampton. We far outnumbered them. We should have been able to handle them easy, but we couldn't. And I'm sure the Canadians or the British felt the same way about their army when they came down here. We were understaffed with a lot of men that got out of their sick bed to fight in the Battle of Plattsburgh. So there's a lot of similarities there. We were discussing earlier about the White House. Britain.
Oh, yeah, let's explain that.
I didn't quite explain it, but it was about my ancestor, Benjamin Marvin. The White House was on Point au Fer, and it was at the very tip, and the British had certain little outposts of land that were still within the United States, and they were on this side of the border. And that was one of the bone of contentions during the War of 1812. So the British had an outpost there until after the War of 1812, that far south of the border. And their ships used to come up to that area, and they used to supply it, and soldiers would stay there. I think the Scales family lived there at one time. I don't know if they still do. And they've uncovered several coins from the British Army and that type of thing. So, and after the end of the war, they abandoned the White House and most of the points south of the Canadian border, and that was the end of that. So that was one of our bone of contention. Besides, they were taking and impressing seamen, taking them all over the world. They were putting them on their ships. The British were, and that was another big bone of contention. Of course, that's common knowledge that everyone's known. So,
I want to stop every now and again to assess the things that we've spoken and to reinforce some of the reasons for our doing these programs. First of all, Jack Bilow is an amazing resource that people ought to check into, read these books, and learn more about why he's got a passion, one of our favorite words, for history in this area. Number two, we all want this North Country to survive and thrive. We relied on things like Plattsburgh Air Force Base and Canadian tourism for a long, long time, and now we don't have an awful lot of both of those. We have a lot of Canadian tourists that come down, but not in the numbers they did in the 60s and 70s. So one of the ways we can get tourists here is to promote history. There is a tremendous effort afoot, as you know, in the greater Plattsburgh area to build an interpretive center in the former old base, part of Plattsburgh Air Force Base, to talk mostly about that focus which we've had in many of our local programs on the Battle of Plattsburgh. But there was also a battle in Chateauguay as part of the War of 1812, separated by some time from that battle. How much time?
Oh, it was about a year's difference. That was October 26th, 1813, and the Battle of Chateauguay was fought in Canada. But there was a skirmish in the town of Chateauguay, which we described when Lieutenant William Nash was killed. And then, of course, Plattsburgh was from September 6th through the 11th in 1814. So there's about a year's difference between the two battles.
And, but the point I'm making here is that everyone watching this program on their local public access cable channel can do their little bit to sustain and promote history by checking out these historic places. Take your kids and visit these spots that we were talking about where this energy may survive.
Well,
Check this stuff out and talk about it. Tell your friends in Oshkosh, Wisconsin about it.
well, you know, Chris Ortloff's been doing a heck of a job there. I mean, he's very well involved in this project here, and he's done a nice job. And with the guy in his position can do a lot more than maybe someone in my position. And hopefully he continues along this vein. But he's doing a great job. Addie Shields has done a great job. She's been the historian here for many years, and she's pushed. And she knew the value a long time ago of things like genealogy and stuff like that when other people didn't realize it. So a lot of times you have people that are starting genealogy, but then they go on a different tangent like I did here, but mainly because my family had been in Chateauguay so long. But you do start to pick up other things that are important to things like the Battle of Plattsburgh and, you know, important things like that other researchers do. So, you know, we've got a lot of people involved in it around here.
I think it behooves all of us as individuals to pay a little attention to it. Calvin and I are doing our part on this program. Other people do. You hear people talk about it. College courses are designed around the War of 1812. We've had the tremendous fortune of meeting some very brilliant historians when we were talking about painting that mural for the Battle of Plattsburgh. We don't know if it'll ever get painted. We hope that it will be in the future, but I don't know about Calvin, but I got a tremendous education. We spent several days there, and we went back when they were trying to recreate some of the battle scenes for photographs. And I imagine we did 12 or maybe 12 hours of videotape just on that process alone. And you talk with there are a lot of people who know about the Battle of Plattsburgh who are not from this area. These guys were from Texas A&M and from Lake Erie and a lot of different places. So I think we're finally getting on the map. You talked about people talking about the War of 1812 as being, the Battle of Plattsburgh being fairly insignificant. Well, we're realizing now, historians are finally realizing that this was pretty darn significant.
Well, you know, it was the gateway, and it was probably the last time that Albany was in the center of New York State. At that time, that was the center. There wasn't a lot west of here. There were of course, people, but the gateway to Canada was through Lake Champlain, and it was significant that we stopped them there. That was a very significant battle. I've had the fortune in looking for the people that were killed in the Battle of Plattsburgh. A man by the name of Clark wrote a book in 1903, and he had a listing for every soldier that was killed in the lake. So I do have those names, which it's going to help a lot. Hopefully we can get something up for these people. I think, at some time we're going to have to put a little time in these people that died here, and it's nice to have the big names like the McDonoughs and the McCombs, but these other fellows gave their life up, and I think we should do something for them.
You must be pretty excited about the last few years and talk in the celebrations. I say use the word celebration very loosely. Commemoration of the Battle of Plattsburgh and how the activities are expanding every year.
Yes, I am. It's great, and if you get down there, you people come down here and they've got their tents up, they're wearing their uniforms, and it's really great. And like I said, there's so many more people that I haven't mentioned that are involved in this in these programs, and they've just recently completed a tape, which is they sell at the Cornerstone Bookstore also on the War of 1812. I think you probably know more about that than I do. I bought the tape, and I enjoyed it a great deal.
Well, it talks about Sackett's Harbor, and you said you've been over there a few times. I was over there long before they finished the restoration. That's it's kind of amazing what they've accomplished over there too.
Well, can you imagine what it would have been for us if we'd have kept the three forts in repair out here on the old base? I mean, you would have had it would have been something like a Ticonderoga, and if they could have kept any part of that, the old hospital out here, it would have been great. As it is, we have the old barracks over there. They're quite interesting. I think they date from the mid 1850 or the 1800s, and that's I understand they want to make a museum out there.
Well, that's the focus for the new interpretive center. That's where Assemblyman Chris Ortloff would like to have anchored a full-size replica of the Saratoga.
Well, they're trying to get.
That gets my blood going.
They're trying to get one of the ships back. I don't know where it is, but I understand that someone had donated to some historic place in Pennsylvania, and they didn't want it. And of course,
The Royal Savage.
Royal Savage, right.
Unfortunately, the Royal Savage was burned to the water, so what remains is only a tiny fraction of the original ship. But whatever it is, it would be great to have it back here. And those of us who've been to the Smithsonian to see the Philadelphia, that's a pretty big thrill when we know where it came from.
Well, I think Mr. Ortloff is very ambitious, and I think he'll work on it. I think he'll get a lot done for us there. And I'm sure, Senator Stafford wouldn't mind helping us either. So I think we can get more things done. I think our people are realizing how important it is to the economy and how important it is to Plattsburgh and the area, so that we can, definitely, get some publicity for our town and for the people that were involved in this war, in this battle here.
A lot of young people and a lot of retired people who could give of their time and efforts to make every year more successful, as we've been talking about the year 2014. What a tremendous anniversary that's going to be.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure they got plans, and I'd like to, this, like I said, I haven't talked to anyone yet about this wall thing, but they've done it. They have a wall in Pearl Harbor for the soldiers that died there, and of course we have the Vietnam Wall here, and they have other places. I think there's one in Burma for the soldiers that were there under Japanese rule, and they have their names there. And I think, even though it's been 200 years, I still think a life is extremely, it's a life they gave up. It was extremely important, and hopefully we can get something done. But I want to be able to get most of the research work done first.
Well, we mentioned just before we opened the book and looked through it a little bit, you mentioned cemeteries. Have you visited many?
Oh, all over the place. I even stop when I don't have anyone buried there and just walk around.
I thought I was the only one who did that. My wife and I will stop the car in Cape Cod or Boston area or wherever, or, Buffalo, wherever we're vacationing. We were down in Mystic Seaport, Connecticut a few years ago when one of our kids got married there. I asked somebody in town, where's the oldest cemetery? They said, oh, right behind the Grand Union or whatever it was. So we drove around there, and we spent about 3 hours. Was the best part, besides the wedding, of course, it was the best part of the whole weekend.
Well, I think one of my favorite stones, and I've never seen it, they've had it in the book for quite a few years, that the inscription on it has the person's name, and then it has the inscription, I told you I was sick, and then they had...
I love that.
I like that. And then they have one over in Vermont, on the island there, where on the inscription has it, died while passing through. So, you don't know where the guy's from or anything. They just buried him there, and they have his name and the date that he died.
They're all passing through, if you think about it.
I was in South Hero, so I enjoyed that. Every year when I go back to that cemetery, I like to take a look at it. So.
Well, we're fortunate here in Clinton County because a now very famous family spent a good portion of their life cataloging the cemeteries of Clinton County, and that's being done again by Clyde Rabideau Sr. We did an interview with him with the first edition when he done, 30-some cemeteries of Clinton County, and he's going to work it until he finishes every single cemetery in Clinton County to recatalog them now. And here's a guy who's willing to spend his summers, lives in Hawaii, of course, in the wintertime, comes up in the summertime and takes a mirror and a pen and pencil and gets on his hands and knees and scrapes the crud away from the ground and shines the mirror of the sun onto the stone so you can read it and tries to write down every single one. And his people like that to make the people like you and make the job for you and me a little bit easier when we're trying to check things out.
Well, the McClellans did the work in the 1940s in all the cemeteries, and why it's so invaluable now, the marble is corroding. I don't know, for lack of a better word, it's disintegrating. So it may have a lot to do with the car pollution, and I think that does. So
acid rain, maybe?
Acid rain, and there's several different reasons, but for years these stones did not corrode, so to speak, and now they are, and a lot of times you can't read the inscription. So McClellan doing that work when they were still in good shape it's invaluable. Their records right now are, I think they have them at the Plattsburgh Public Library and they have them at the Feinberg Library, but as far as genealogy goes, that's one of the greatest collections, and my hat's off to those guys. Woody, and they just did a great job. But
all right, let's get into the book here. You just leaf through it as things come to your mind, and we've hopscotched all over the topic, But I want just to give. I don't want to tell people everything about the entire book, but I just want to give them a few ideas. And I'm sure if you look at a few pages, things will come to mind that'll be of interest to our general audience.
We've covered a part about the battle, and then the retreat back to Chateauguay, and then the dispersal of the army, and then of course they stayed there in the winter. And we had an interesting character by the name of James Wilkinson. And Wilkinson left all of his men in Fort Covington, and he went to stay in a fancy house in Malone where he was warm, where the soldiers were dying like flies. So he also was prominent in the Spanish conspiracy. And he was working both sides of the fence. He was known as Agent 13. And
come on.
That's a true story.
Oh, boy.
And he was being paid $2,000 a year by the Spanish government to alienate the western states from the eastern states. And so he was quite a character. He ended up being court-martialed and for his activity in the war. But he was a heavy drinker, and he was well-to-do, and he didn't want anything to do with the battle at all. So he was defeated, and his men spent the year in French Mills. So we do have a lot of characters here involved. Right now, the Battle of Chrysler's Field is underwater when they put in the dam out there. And here's a little picture of the way the regiments were set up during the battle itself. So, but it's all underwater. There's no more Chrysler's Field anymore. And we had quite a bit of people wondering where things were in Chateauguay and how I knew that the Army came from Canada and came up through Earlville and into Chateauguay and past Fort Hickory. Well, it was quite simple. It was the only road into Canada. As a matter of fact, it was known as the road to Montreal for quite a few years, and then it was the Smith Road, and then that's the Earlville Road. So when they came into town, that was the only way they could come into town. There was no other road, and they did, and that's where they had the skirmish. So, you have all these things that you work with, and they had several of the houses, people had soldiers stay in them, sick soldiers. It was done here in Plattsburgh quite a bit, and you had the same thing out there with these people here. And I have a nice little picture here that I had drawn. It's entitled, "You're All Under Arrest in the Name of King George." They had a raiding party on February 20th, 1814, and what they used to have was a prize list. And everything you could capture, they sold it at public auctions. The soldiers got so much, the privates and the captains, and everybody got a bigger share. The higher you went up, the bigger share you went up. I think when they, the Confiance was taken over, they had a sale there, and all that stuff was sold, and it's documented in the Plattsburgh paper at the time of what exactly was on that ship. So anytime they won, the soldiers made out. So it was, but anyway, what interests me is that when the British soldiers come in, it was 4:00 in the morning, and the people were still drinking in the tavern. So as you can see, Chateaugay's changed little. I still drink it, but it's 3:00 now. But anyway, that was one of the things that amused me about that raid that we had. And then they have a list of, here's a store, Amos of Fairman was raided, and all of his things were taken because he was found with rifles and things in his possession. So they also took the rifles but confiscated the rest of his stuff. So there were many claims put into the United States for loss of goods and damages, and sometimes the soldiers would come in and they would be hungry, of course, and they'd take all the pigs or all the cows. So these guys would have to file for a claim to the United States government, and sometimes the government wasn't very fast on paying for it. So as was during the Battle of Plattsburgh here, when Macomb ordered them to fire the houses, there were several houses that were fired on here and burnt to the ground, so the British soldiers couldn't hide behind them. And these people were, within a year or two, they were compensated well. These people had their houses burned down. So we have the same thing going on here in Chateauguay. And here's one that we have claims. There was a fellow out there who was going to try to skin the government, as he explained, for as much as he could. And he was so willing to talk to everybody that they had an agent come up and ask him about it. And he blabbed everything, so they arrested him right there. So we have, I found one of the best, we were talking earlier about getting into collections where you have associates and stuff like this. This feller named Robert Seller wrote a book on the history of Chateauguay and Beauharnois counties. And he went around in 1880 and interviewed old men in their 80s. And probably he has 4 volumes. And in this these guys describe their life, and some of them describe the War of 1812. He interviewed 3 or 4 people from Chateauguay, New York, and Seller's book I found was one of the most accurate that I had worked with as a second-hand source, not using primary papers and things like that. And he did a nice job. He's, as a matter of fact, he was the news editor for the Huntington Gleaner for many years, and his collection is now in the Ottawa archives. So if for anybody that has people, they may have their great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather interviewed, and they have probably 2, 3, 4 paragraphs on how his life went. So this type of stuff, when you can find it, it's invaluable when you're doing that type of research work. And he was quite a historian during his time. He had to go out by a horse and buggy and interview these old timers after he got done his day's work at night. And a lot of nights they're talking by candlelight, and he did an awful lot of research work. But he's been gone for quite a few years. I think he has a grandson that lives out in Manitoba or something now.
But again, what a great resource.
Oh, certainly.
What do you got here? You got some papers under there that we haven't seen?
No, I just shown you earlier some of the death records.
Oh, I see, death records, yeah.
Cantonment in Plattsburgh. There's quite a few with the 29th Regiment, as you can see. This is Captain George Vachon, and if anybody has a captain's book of the company or knows of one, I would certainly pay all expenses for a Xerox copy and an additional $25 for their time, because you can see how clearly the death registers list here where they died and the date that they died. And they have one here, Lacole River, Lower Canada, and it has March 30th, and that's when we had a skirmish there in that area. And then they have in Burlington and in Cantonment, Plattsburgh. Cantonment, Plattsburgh, it runs all the way down through here. And this is the register of deaths. These men all died in the Plattsburgh area. And they have some here as you can follow the movements of the regiment as they go to Brownsville and other places. As they move around, the soldiers die in the area that they're in. But a lot of times you can't tell by that where the regiment is. Maybe someone will stay in hospital here at Burlington or Plattsburgh and then go to French Mills or go out to Sackett's Harbor, things like that. So sometimes they just might linger for a month or two before they pass away. Really the hospital was really dangerous. When I was younger, I remember the old timers didn't want to go to the doctors, and probably up until World War II, most of our doctors were still bleeding people. I had my great-grandmother bled to death because they went and bled her. She had a stroke, and 2 weeks later she died. And I had my grandfather's sister ruptured her spleen on a toboggan, and all they did was bleed her, and of course she died. So a lot of those old-timers, they had a good reason for not going to see the doctor at that time. It was a dangerous business. They knew a lot of those people never come back. And so...
And it's still a fairly inexact science these days, although we wouldn't take anything away from the expertise of the medical profession, but I strive very hard to stay healthy.
Well, I think in the last 60 years that, everybody knows they just made tremendous strides. We have, the people are so much more knowledgeable now, and we have a lot of brilliant people here and in Burlington and stuff, they take care of us when we get sick, so. But it wasn't like that back in the War of 1812.
It just dawns on me. You've mentioned Pike's Cantonment a few times here. It's not something we've mentioned today except in direct connection with the topics. But do you have any ideas about whether Keith Herculow's latest location is accurate?
It is, trust me.
I love it.
I saw the map. I think it was in Woody McClellan's collections, and it's got... the cantonment right on it. It was actually, before Pike died, I think they called it the Saranac Cantonment. And I think Macomb named one of his sons, his middle name or his first name, Saranac also. I seen that they have a genealogy, and it's either him or, I think it's him. He named one of his sons Saranac. So, he has the right, and he pretty well knows it too. I'm hoping he'll publish something around it. I've never met him. I've talked to him on the phone, but he's got the right. He's got it. It's right there on the map. It was in the McClellan collection. So
Keith's a good friend, and we've seen Keith go from just being interested in a general way in history, and he and I have talked about it for hundreds and hundreds of hours, to becoming very, very passionate about that specific topic. Talk about genealogy. As the city clerk in the city of Plattsburgh, he's done wonderful things for people who couldn't find their parents and grandparents and needed documentation to receive benefits in their old age. And the man has gone above and beyond the call of duty to help people like that out. But then getting involved in the history and now getting directly involved in this whole commemoration of the Battle of Plattsburgh and helping to build the bateau and to spend some time over the holidays selling these beautiful gold ornaments up at the malls to help raise money toward that interpretive center. But the hours, the places he traveled to and the hours he spent trying to pinpoint Pike's cantonment was a special kick for me, because it's nice to see a friend accomplish something when they really go for it. And secondly, because he's just a good guy and deserves the credit for doing it.
Well, I'm glad he found it. People have been looking for it for 50 or 60 years and trying to locate it. And I talked to him on the phone. I'd like to meet him. I think he's doing a tremendous job. I really do.
Well, good. I'm glad you said that. Although there are people viewing this program who still disagree. But that's what makes a horse race. And if somebody comes up with a better idea, he'd like to see it too. You know?
Well, it's like I said, it was known as a Saranac cantonment, and he did a nice piece of research work, and he's worked on it very hard, I guess, from what I understand. But I'm pretty sure he's got the right.
He sure did. And I was privileged to be one of the few people that was in on the whole thing from the very beginning, and we couldn't let the cat out of the bag until it was finally finished, for all the reasons you can completely understand. Is there anything else about this subject of the Battle of Plattsburgh and the War of 1812? What are you pointing at? Oh, what's this stack of stuff you got up here?
Well, that's the same. That's the muster rolls and things that.
Well, at least we can show people that you've done it.
This is some of the work I completed down in the National Archives, but again, it's more registers of deaths. But we also have some muster rolls that I copied. Now, here's one that was of interest to me. I found this this is in letters to the Secretary of War, and I found this. It lists 3 of the guys that were at the Battle of Plattsburgh, and they were. You probably can't see it here in the camera; it doesn't show up well. But anyways, I found it by accident. It was in a letter written by Captain Alden Partridge, and I just happened to be going through the letters to the Secretary of War, and it has 3 of our men who served here during the Battle of Plattsburgh, and one was Totten, which we just showed his map. And there were a couple others here listed on here that were also commended during the Battle of Plattsburgh, and I would have to look through this a little closer to find their names. But
little teeny tiny writing, and you don't have any glasses on?
Not yet.
Oh man! And you have to search and figure out the kind of writing and the kind of language and.
Well, it's not too bad. Now here's one of the muster rolls, and this is what they have in the National Archives. And this is what I've been researching in the last few weeks. And a lot of times over to the right, they have under remarks where the individual died or where he is sick in hospital and that type of thing. George McGlasson is one of the fellows in the 15th Regiment that I have that was here during the Battle of Plattsburgh, and I have his copy of his muster rolls, but it's kind of expensive. They're 50 cents a sheet down there, and you can tell there's a lot of
there's more than $5 worth right there, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, they give you cards, and I think I went through about $40 worth of Xerox stuff, and the Xerox machine broke down the second week I went there, so I had to do a lot of work by hand. Instead of Xeroxing this, I had to do it by hand.
Do you ever take a tape recorder with you to talk into it as you're reading this stuff so you can come back and transcribe it?
No.
Or never thought of that?
No. Well, I don't do that. I probably could, and it'd probably be one of the ways, but I'm still one of those backwards researchers who does everything kind of slow. But you find a lot of things in doing the research work, and you get to meet a lot of people down there. The National Archives isn't run as well as it used to be 20 years ago. I can tell. No, they have people that they like to rotate around, and I was looking for information, and they either didn't know where it was, or if they knew where it was, they didn't know what was in it. And they had one overhead Xerox machine that broke down, so for a month that I know of, at least, they had no backup for it. So these people that would fly in from California or things, sometimes I thought the Marx Brothers were running the place there. You know, they just don't. And they're charging so much now. For instance, if you want a Xerox copy and you mail it in, they charge you 70 cents and they put it on microfilm. Well, most of us don't have microfilm readers. We like our documents. But not only that, there's a minimum of $10 charge. So if you want one Xerox of something you send to the National Archives, it's going to cost you $10 at least to get something on one page on microfilm, you know, and then you're going to have to pay to get it Xeroxed from the microfilm off there. So to me, they're not making it customer friendly. They say they are, but and you know, there are some good people up there that are taking care of, but they're compared to 20 years ago, there's no competition.
That might be worthy of a letter to your congressman, huh?
Well, I don't know. I've been thinking about it, and at first I let the steam clear off a little bit because I had to the last 5 days I was there, I had to write almost every name out. I had to write every name out one at a time, 500 names. I spent 52 hours doing that, and I'm not finished with it yet. I have to go down for one more trip. But with the Xerox machine, you can see how easy it is, that's just one of the small things that they're not. And it's a long time. Sometimes you can write to the National Archives 3 months before you get a reply, and then you have to send in the money, and it's 3 more months before you get a reply. And so if you're working in one area and you get one paper back after 6 months, it gives you new ideas. So you have to send. So you could get through one thing and conceivably take you a year before you get through the whole thing. And it's I don't know. They should hire more people. It is the National Archives. One Xerox machine, to me, would.
All right. We're talking about the archives.
But I will say this. You find more information in the National Archives by accident. There is just a tremendous amount there. And there's some tremendously intelligent people working there also. But, I was a little discouraged compared to 20 years ago. But given that, I think everybody ought to take a trip down there to Washington. It's nice down there, and if you're going to do research work, that's one of the places to go. A lot of these soldiers, like I said, their names would never be brought up again unless somebody finds them. Nobody's ever done that type of work. So it's not really genealogy. I don't think. It's more or less giving these people some recognition, which this is all they're going to get. So
How many copies of the Chateauguay book have you sold?
over 1,400. And which is, I think some of the cats and dogs in Chateauguay must have bought a copy too, because they've been very good. People in Chateauguay have been very good to me about buying my books. So
Money left.
I overpublished. I figured I'd sell 1,000, so I have 600 left, probably roughly somewhere between 500 or 600 left. So. Like I said, you never make any. No one ever makes any money at producing a local history. You don't. You lose money. I've lost a lot of money, and of course that's the money that you could be investing. But that's not the point. It is my hobby. Some people like to ride skidoos, and some people like to collect things, and it's my hobby, and I'm not complaining. I'm just glad that I'm able to put this stuff out.
All right. We got another book over here that we haven't even talked about. What's this all about, Jack?
Well, this is on Chateauguay basketball from the very beginning. And it's 80 years, and we have quite a few of our local dignitaries in there that played and stuff like that. Ray Holmes, that coached Chateauguay for many years, is in that book. He coached Chateauguay for 6 years.
Ray Holmes, who was a very close personal friend and married a girl from my hometown in Moira. So we played ball with Ray for a long time, and we were sad to see him go.
Well, I always thought Ray had more charisma than the law allowed. He's a very charismatic person. He's also a great coach, and he's a good friend of mine, too. So.
Yep. I'll tell you, when you get to be old, like I am, you see that happen too many times to your good friends who die. But Ray Holmes did leave a tremendous legacy, and especially in the sports field.
Oh, for both places. No denying that he could get more out of the boys than most guys did, and he was a great coach. I really liked him.
So what inspired this book?
Well, probably what inspired it is when I was a kid, you used to hear stories about this guy named Jim Seymour scoring 53 points in a game, and did he really score it? And what really happened? So basically something I wanted to do from childhood. It probably was a lifelong thing that I wanted to do. And you'd have to understand Chateauguay basketball for anybody that, we have a small gym that packs them in, and sometimes we've had probably, I'd say we have capacity for 600. I know that some nights there's more than that in there.
I remember the old Saranac gyms where their capacity for, I think the sign said 642, and there were that many standing in the hallway trying to see over each other's shoulders back in the glory days.
Saranac and Plattsburgh High had probably one of the bitterest competitions for basketball. I mean, you could go into a gym almost any time; they'd be packed. And this year, they're still doing the same thing. They're still packing them in for both games. I don't like the idea of 3:00 in the afternoon games. There's a lot of us that have to work on Saturdays. Well, I don't know what their idea is, unless they just want to cut out a certain segment of the people that want to go to these basketball games. But we don't have anything like that in Section 10. And over here, 3:00 in the afternoon. It just doesn't do it. These games should be held when people can see them. And a lot of people, it's not like it was when a lot of people had weekends off. a lot of people are working Saturdays. You got a lot of people that work in corrections, for instance, that have to work through the week. They can't make these games, and I hope they change it.
You know, it is nice. We've talked a lot about, we started talking about small towns and communities. It's like neighborhoods in big cities, same kind of idea. But it's nice to see that there are still some really rabid sports fans who start encouraging kids in Little League and, sandlot baseball and pickup basketball games and encourage their kids to get involved in sports and then follow it all through school. Because no matter what professional sport you enjoy, and yes, I did enjoy that giant victory over the past weekend, there's nothing like the excitement of a high school game, any kind of a high school game.
Well, I think that's true, and I think the thing that I like the most is the argument part. It never ends. Who's the best player? Who had the best team? Everyone has their idea, and I think it's great. And I think you can get these conversations, and we talk a lot of basketball in Chateauguay, and you can get in these conversations, and they go on, oh, this guy was better 20 years ago, or no, this guy was better, no, this team was better, and it goes on forever. And it's a joy, and it gives community an opportunity. Now, they really pulled behind our Bulldogs last year. We went to the Final Four, both the girls and the boys. So we had probably between 800 and 1,000 people from Chateauguay, Burke, and Malone going down to Thruway down to the Final Four last year. And it's like Calvin said, don't you wish you would waited a year? I said, yeah, my son was on that team. I had no idea that they would even win. They only had 2 players back from the year before that were the sixth man and and him. I had no idea they'd go to the Final Four. It just it blew my mind out. And I just got done this thing. I figured they'd have a 500 year at best, But they fooled me, and so did the girls. But the community really pulled together. We had some lady from St. Lawrence Central come to the game, which wasn't important in the standings, but she turned around and said, my God, is it always like this? And I said, well, a lot of times you're going to have this place packed, and it was just that type of year. We probably had, not because of Chateauguay alone, but when they played in Potsdam against Herman DeKalb, they had 3 games that day. We were the final game, and the gym holds 3,000, and the gym was packed for that game.
Isn't that great?
And oh yeah, it was great. And
they get $3,000 for a college, for a Plattsburgh State Cardinal hockey game, and it's great. You get 3,000 people, you got a huge gym full. But here you go.
Well, the thing of it is what we played before we played the Messina game out there last year. They had a little ceremony for John Hollinshead, who used to be the coach. He's a great coach. And he came out on the floor, and they gave him a 5-minute standing ovation. And when he came back, they gave him another 3-minute standing ovation. And the team ran out to a 16-2 lead. Our team did. I fired them up pretty good, So even though he wasn't coach, he had a little hand there too. But I was telling Calvin earlier today, our Class D team has won the overall championship. That's B, C, D, and E 3 out of the last 9 years. Now, no Class D team over here in Section 7, I don't think, has ever won the overall crown since it's been revamped in the last 20, 25 years. But Chateauguay, for a small school, they used to call it years in the 30s the North Country Championship, which basically was Section 10. And we've been in the big game 7 times. That's where we face against the big school for the final, and we won it 6 out of 7 times. So they had a great team in 1937 and 1940. 1965 we played against Messina, we beat them, and of course 91 against Ogdensburg, 95 against Messina, and 2000 against Messina again. So we've got Messina 3 times. And Jerry Welch was from Chateauguay. He used to coach Messina. He coached against Ray Holmes too, and we beat Messina in the final overall in 1965. And Jerry's a great guy too. Jerry's great, and he coached at Siena there, and his son's now coaching. I think is at Providence, Jerry grew up in Chateauguay, and he left when he was about 15 years old and went to Messina. So we've had a lot of history. We have, in the back of the book here, we've got, for a small town, we have, of course, you heard of Kevin O'Neill, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
And he's now with the New York Knicks. But Kevin's one of our coaches from Chateauguay, and, of course, and there's Jerry Welch, and there's his son. And right there, and that's Jerry. And, of course, Mike Dean. Now, Mike Dean didn't live in Chateauguay, but Mike Dean went to Potsdam, and he had friends in Chateauguay, and because he loved basketball so much, he'd come to Chateauguay and play all weekend if he wanted to. And I could never figure out whether he liked the basketball or the social times more, but Mike Dean was in Chateauguay a lot. So for a small town, we have connections with big-time basketball here. And Kevin, I hope he keeps moving on, and Mike's made the NCAAs last year in his first year at Lamar. These guys keep going on. Jerry's retired now. He goes to Florida and things like that.
You bring up a good point. I'm not sure how often you mention it in the book, but how many generations would be the maximum of families who had boys that played or girls that played basketball in Chateauguay?
Well, 3 generations. We have some families with 3 generations of boys that have played. Sometimes it skips a generation. Girls have only played for maybe 25 or so years out there now, because for quite a few years it was considered unladylike, and they didn't want to play basketball. The girls played in the 20s, and then in the 50s, as you know, and 60s, there weren't too many girls teams around. And they've started up, which is good for the girls. But we had a lot. There was in doing the research, you run into a lot of other articles, and one of the articles that amused me the most, they were having TB. Trouble with a lot of tuberculosis at one particular time, and some guy was going around who was a doctor saying it was because the ladies were wearing short dresses, during the flap era.
Oh, come on.
This is a true story. It was right in the Malone Telegram, and he was going around. He's getting paid for these things, and I just broke out laughing. I mean, you run into things like this that would make you, I just broke out laughing. I couldn't, these ridiculous things that they used to go around and do. So.
Well, a lot of the information was word of mouth, or did you just go through every newspaper you could find?
Oh, I went through the Plattsburgh at various times. I was very fortunate in some cases, but at various times I used a lot of articles right out of the papers and also out of the high school yearbooks. So you see, you have something back here. You're dealing in the 20s and stuff like that, and I. You didn't use much of word of mouth. I went directly. I tried to get everything I could. Word of mouth was used for interviews. I interviewed Bill Dupree when he was 97 years old.
Did you really?
And he was my dad's first cousin, and he was the coach of Chateauguay in the 40s and the 30s. And he gave me a good interview. And he was one of these guys that even at 97 years old, and when it comes to sports, you know how we are, a lot of us. He had his firm idea of what was the best and what wasn't, and even at 97, he didn't weaken a bit, and I really appreciated that.
That's great.
Yeah, and
go ahead. You can leaf through that as we did the other book. You see something that might be interesting, or something that reminds you of a good story?
That right there.
well, these are my 3 sons. They all played in Chateauguay, and
Might as well.
and I
My
dedicated
3 sons. Does that sound familiar?
the book to them, and so we had a great amount of fun in 1995. We had a great amount of fun in 2000, winning the overall championship in Section 10. So,
When did you finish this book?
this was finished. I think it's been over a year now. It'll be 2 years in August. I was fortunate in finding some old pictures here. We got the picture of the town hall where they used to play basketball upstairs in Chateauguay. And, of course, with the low ceilings, you didn't get much of an outside shot. You just, a lot of layups. And then they had the old school down here in 1907. On the front here, the banner I got from the Hilliker House in Chateauguay. This is a Chateauguay banner. I don't think there's too many left in existence. And this was from probably about 1907. And then this trophy here, I had it redone in Montreal. It was from the first league championship we had in 1926. That was a team that Buzz Herrica was on, and that was our first championship team. But it looked like somebody taking an axe to it. And when I gave it to our superintendent, Mr. Callan, I said, he looked at me and I said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll bring it back." So he had that look. I said, I'll try to get it fixed. I had to take it to Montreal to get it fixed, and they popped everything out, and then they re-silvered it. So, and then when it was originally taken here, let me see, in 26, I think. Let me see here. And there it is, originally taken in 1926. And here's some of the players that were playing at that time. This book has a lot of little hidden costs in it. I'll never break even. I've lost a lot of money on this, but it was my hobby. I had to go through. I'd used pictures out of the yearbook, the Chateauguay yearbooks. I'd got them all together, and I found out that they weren't as good as the originals. So then I had to spend $300 in phone calls and also to get these rescreened because I'd saw the blueprint when it originally come back. But as you can see, if you take a look at the original picture, you see how clear it comes out. And it was worth it to me to have these pictures come out clear. And I want to tell you something. I think some of the old-timers got a kick out of this. These guys had played their sports from years ago.
Oh, sure.
And a lot of these guys They really, really enjoyed it. And here we have a picture of the old gymnasium and the old school at Chateauguay High School. And this was done in 1924, and this picture was taken in 24, and you can see it's quite a bit different than the gyms. And when they used to talk about, being filled to the rafters, well, here's the rafters, and this is where, and there were rafters, and as you can see, there are the rafters. But there's a lot of stories, and I think it's one of our pastimes in Chateauguay has always been discussing our basketball team, because we take a lot of pride in the basketball in Chateauguay, and I'm sure there's a lot of other communities. I was talking earlier with Calvin today about teams, and they had 3 teams at one time in Champlain. They had Rouse's Point and Champlain and St. Mary's and Moores, right? They probably had 4 teams, and now it's all consolidated into one. So I don't think you have that same small town type of feeling as you might. I'm sure there's a lot of rabid fans up there, but with a little town like Chateauguay, it's been one of our big sources of pride for years. When you get a small team that can compete with a school like Messina, who has over 1,000 kids in 9 through 12, when we might have 130 or 140 in 9 through 12. So it's like I said, it's something I've always wanted to do, and also get the records straight, because after 8 or 10 years, and sometimes I don't know if the records are straight, even though you've written, but after 8 or 10 years, everything starts to fade into the past. How many points this guy scored, or how good this was, or how many assists. I was lucky, because we were mentioning before, you're going through the newspapers. I went through a newspaper. It would probably take me, I'd spend 4 or 5 nights on 1 year of newspaper. So I come down to Plattsburgh and go through the old Plattsburgh, and then the Plattsburgh Press. Republican, there was 2 newspapers, and they joined together. So I had to go through them. Then I'd have to go through the Malone papers, and then I go through the Chateauguay Record. And the Chateauguay Record had quite a bit of stuff. But fortunately, for some reason, we had about 30 or 40 years of scorebooks in the coach's locker room at Chateauguay. And it really helped, because in the 50s, for some reason, we didn't get much press. And if I hadn't had those original books, I wouldn't have been able to fill in a lot. Like Jim Seymour, Jack Bouye had a 37-point game, and we had guys like Jack Stickney playing, and a lot of these records you wouldn't have been able to get. So we had some great players back in the old days. We had a dry spell in the 50s, but we've more than made up through it through the years. And Bill Dupree, of course, he was a great coach. And right now we've got Coach Boyer out there, and he's did a great job there in the last few years. And we've had Ray Holmes and quite a few of these guys. He's done a good job and taken a lot of pride in their team. So.
Let this be a lesson to those people who might be viewing this program who say, nothing ever happens in Chateauguay. I mean, wow.
It's like I said, it's a great community, and as I say in the book here, I've never hid my love for Chateauguay or the community or the people in the community. It's just I spend a lot of time there still. Even though I've moved back here in the last year, I still go out there a lot. I still have relatives out there, and there's a lot of good people out there. It's a lot of fun.
And also a lesson to those people who live in a community that doesn't get very much publicity, that may be a little bit off the beaten path, but it always has history.
Oh, yeah.
And it takes somebody like a Jack Bilow to decide to get his pencil and paper and his camera and his walking shoes on to do something about it.
Well, we have a lot of people that help the community out there. They have a revitalization committee out there that's doing a lot of work. And it's, like I said, it's like any other small town. It has its problems, but to me, it was a perfect-sized town. And we had our own newspaper, and it was great. And like I said, everybody knew everybody, and I think it's changed quite a bit now. People are moving in and out, all small communities in the North Country now. So life in the small communities has changed. A lot of people stay in their houses all day and play with their internet machines or play Nintendo, or as my sons call it, no friendo. If you're going to play it all day, you got no friends, So there's a lot of things that TV, too, a lot of things that take away from a small community. And of course, it was a farming community. It's not so much anymore. It's changed a great deal. But.
Yeah, occasionally, I can't help but write newspaper columns about the very thing you just talked about. I have nothing against computers and the internet, and I enjoy doing research on my computers as much as anybody. But there's a lot to be said about interacting, as we're doing here today, interacting with each other. I could read your books and never learn half as much about Jack Bilow as I have sitting at your kitchen table for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. You
might not want to learn too much, so we'll just do the books.
We'll still keep our skeletons in the closets. But it is great to learn about people and to interact with the world. And a place like Chateaugay, it's beautiful countryside.
Well,
There's history. Walk the walk.
When I
You know?
was growing up, people talk more. There were less things to do. They, when you live in the country, your friend might be 2 years older than you or 2 years younger than you, or an old aunt or an uncle would come in and something, and you'd sit and visit. I don't think you have so much of that anymore. People are too busy. I got to watch my show tonight, Whereas when I was growing up, if somebody came in, they shut the TV off, and everybody,
See that?
everybody
Now
visited.
try that today. You know what they do? I was watching a sitcom last night, and the woman on the sitcom was choking to death, and her husband was sitting there with a remote trying to get it louder and louder because she was making too much noise. I was on the floor because that is true, during the evening meal. Can you imagine as a kid a television going on when your family group was around the supper
No, I
table?
never do that. And of course, a lot of times I'm guilty myself. I'll pick up a plate and go watch TV.
wow.
What the heck?
No, but this is true, and I think it's okay for us to talk about the old days. In many ways, they were the good old days, because some of the things we did, like this interacting with nature and with your friends and sitting down having a conversation with your grandmother.
And there's a lot of things. Your neighbors. I had great neighbors there. We had a close little neighborhood. There's 4 or 5 houses in the neighborhood. The Gillettes and the Hillikers and the Smiths and Dick Cook, and then the Mahars and McCanns lived up the road from us, and it was a great community. I mean, it was just we weren't involved that much with the village, but we were involved with each other. I mean, it was close by. It was handy. We were all good friends, and I could always feel that I could walk in their house, and if I needed a place to stay the night, they'd put me up with no problem. I mean, this was just the way that they were. And we had many farm families. I grew up with the O'Connors, and they had 12 kids, and it was a great family, and we had a lot of fun and a lot of arguments and stuff, but that's one of the things when you're growing up. So you make a lot of good friendships that you don't have the same type of thing in big city living than you would in a smaller community, I think. And I think anybody that's grown up in a small community probably would say, the same.
Yeah, we've plucked Chateaugay out of the rest of the world today to focus on it, but a lot of small communities are that same way. Chateaugay has made its mark, not only with the game of basketball, but back to the War of 1812 and before, and since the 16 and 1700s when people first started coming through Chateaugay, there have been a lot of people who've been college presidents, who've written other books about the North Country, who've been historians.
We had a lieutenant governor of New York State. I can't remember his name. He graduated from Chateaugay in 1907. So we had, but I think every community has their doctors and their lawyers and stuff. And if you notice, a lot of the presidents of the United States have come out of small towns too. I mean, it's a fertile ground, but. And not taking anything against city living, and it's just not as close. It's not as close knit. I guess you don't know everyone's business when you live in a city like Plattsburgh. So
I'm very glad to have grown up in a lot of small towns, and as you know, I live in Morrisonville, and it's a charming community. I never dreamed when I moved in there 30 years ago that I would never move again, but I doubt if I ever will. You get the roots down so far, it's hard to take a step.
Oh yeah, it is. It is. I don't think I've ever been away from Chateaugay more than a month in my life.
I love it.
So, I mean, you always come back there. If I go on vacation or something, it's only like a couple weeks, but I'm there quite a bit, and I always have it like throughout the summer and stuff. But I had lived there the last 6 years until I, can't move back here. So it's a good town, and like I said, you can't beat it for the people. I mean, it's nice to be able to, just about everybody you see on the street, you say hello to. It's good. I like that.
I like small town USA, and I like the opportunity to have a guy like our friend Calvin Castine behind the camera to sit here and find the Jack Bilow story for a couple hours. I have nothing against network television, network news, and radio because I was in the business for all those years, but I do have something against a 20-second soundbite about the life of Jack Bilow.
Oh, wow.
And we haven't even scratched the surface in almost 2 hours.
Like I said, don't try, but
we said mostly the good parts.
Okay. Calvin's got to have a love for this business for all the work. He's at basketball games all over the place and doing this work, and it's certainly great. It gives us, I think, it gives us a chance to know people in the community and things like that. But
I think it's just terrific. Jack, again, our time is about up for this episode. Who knows? There could be a chapter 2. We've done that before, too,
Well, I think we've covered just about everything here. But
we don't know when the next book's coming out, though.
Well, I'm going to do something with these names and things, and I've also got a few things that I want to publish, like Colonel Purdy's account of the Battle of Chateauguay, McComb's account of the Battle of Plattsburgh. I want to put these things in it with these soldiers, and it'll be a record that'll last for a while. But I'm hoping I can do some more research work and get this work finished and get it out.
Well, I'll give you my personal thanks for your passion for all the things that you're interested in. It just happens that most of the rest of us are interested in those kinds of things too. We just don't know how to go about it. So thank you for leading the way. Thanks for being a good guy and inviting us in your home today, Jack.
Well, thanks for coming over, Gordy Little.
Good luck in everything you do, and we'll be watching that Chateauguay basketball team for a long time to come.
They might do it again this year.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Maybe by the time this program is on television. We're at 8 Grace Avenue talking with Jack Bilow and having a great time doing it. Who knows where we're going to be next